All right, welcome back to Baltimore Birdwatchers. We decided to go live, I think for the first time, to recap. I almost said celebrate. I don't know if this is I guess kind of celebrate, but recap a very, very busy Orioles trade deadline. There was a small part of me that thought the Orioles might not be quite this active, but they really were. The big news, the big trades, obviously, is that Ryan O'Hearn has been dealt along with Ramon Laureano to the Padres. And Cedric Mullins has been dealt to the New York Mets. Mullins, I think we can start with just a longtime Oriole, a player that was never necessarily the best guy on the team, although he did have that 30-30 year, and he was pretty clearly the best player on the team that year. But just day in, day out, just he's there. I saw a lot of people noting today on social media that for a very long time it has been Adam Jones and then Cedric Mullins playing center field in Baltimore. And so certainly seeing Cedric leave is not surprising to me, especially, given that he picked up a little bit as of late. It's bittersweet. I'm not going to say that any of these are a bummer because this is part of the business of baseball. But Mullins is a guy, when I got my City Connect jersey, I wanted it to be a Mullins City Connect jersey because I connect him to this period of Baltimore baseball more than any other. The rebuild into hopefully the rebirth. We're going to see how that continues over the next while. Daniel, wanted to get your thoughts on Cedric Mullins first, and then Ryan O'Hearn, and then we're going to get into these trades in a little bit more detail. But I just wanted to get the kind of the human perspective on these guys leaving Baltimore.
Well, as somebody who's followed the team really closely, it's obviously sad to see guys like this go. I had to give the shirt one more run while it was relevant. For Cedric Mullins, he was the longest tenured Oriole following the departure of Anthony Santander, and really he led by example. Was I think the coolest thing to watch about him. He was never aggressively outspoken, always just kind of said he was doing his job, and a lot of times doing his job led to extraordinary defensive plays. He hit for the cycle. He had a 30-30 season. Was our only hitter who produced in the playoffs last year. Cedric Mullins will always be remembered to me, I think, as one of the Orioles' biggest highlight or moment machines. He may not have always been the best player day in and day out, but he produced some of the most highlights and memorable moments, I think, of any Oriole from this Mike Elias era so far, right? So that's kind of what I'll always associate him with. And then as for O'Hearn, just an awesome story. Clearly a huge part of the clubhouse, really wanted to involve himself in the community as well. Having spoken to him before at one of the caravan events in the winter, actually genuinely a very nice person to talk to, took an interest in conversing. So yeah, he's definitely going to be a missed presence in the clubhouse and the lineup. He was our only all-star this year. So, it may have been a career year, but that's certainly a void that'll be missing in this lineup down the road. And even though there's a lot of young prospects on the way, there's no guarantee that any of them just step in and produce like an all-star in the next couple of years.
Yeah, certainly not. I think one of the things with Mullins and O'Hearn getting a little bit more towards the business side is that they were acquired very, very cheaply. Mullins was, I believe, a 13th round draft pick. O'Hearn, obviously, we sent away our favorite guy, cash considerations for him. But that was an unbelievable trade that turned into an all-star first baseman. And, something interesting, we saw some reports today about the Orioles having a really high asking price for O'Hearn. To some, that indicated that they were, still in on re-signing him after this season, because if he has a desire to come back, he does seem to have a desire to stay in Baltimore, although once he hits free agency, obviously things can change very differently. But it was interesting to see that O'Hearn was the guy that they were kind of seemingly most reticent to part with, at least until they got the return that they were looking for. And just talk about a character guy, a leader. I think that having a guy who has been through that adversity, I mean, both of these guys actually are really, really good examples of players who have been through not just a bad season, but significant adversity in their Major League Baseball careers and fought back from it to continue to be contributors to this team. And I think that is one of the things that I hope O'Hearn was really able to impart on especially like a Kobe Mayo before he left. I do think that the Orioles' handling of their prospects created some adversity for guys like Mayo and guys like Kerstad, and I'm hoping that O'Hearn and Mullins were able to kind of show them and give them, if not just be living proof that you can get through adversity, but actually give them the tools they need to get through it. So we want to go now. It is tough to say goodbye to Cedric and to Ryan O'Hearn. But the Orioles, sorry, it's still in the middle of training camp. The Orioles are really focused, it seems, on rebuilding their farm system after depleting it the last couple of years with the Corbin Burns trade, the Trevor Rogers trade, a few others. And they were really focused on rebuilding it. And we can get to some of the longer term outlook stuff maybe towards the end, but I really just want to go almost deal by deal and get Daniel's take on what the Orioles are going to be bringing, what these guys are going to be, some of these traded players are going to bring to their new teams, as well as any initial information that you have on our new prospects. So I'm going to start with the Ryan O'Hearn deal. This one was a blockbuster. O'Hearn and Ramon Laureano sent to the San Diego Padres, who, AJ Preller is known for building the Padres to win every year. And this was, this deadline is another huge example of that. They had the huge Mason Miller, JP Sears deal that went down before this. They acquire O'Hearn and Laureano, and they give back Boston Bateman, Cobb Hightower, Tyson Neighbors, Victor Figueroa, Tanner Smith, and Brandon Butterworth. Now, just straight off the cuff, that's a collection of names right there. Cobb Hightower and Brandon Butterworth, along with Boston Bateman, are just those are just great baseball names to me. That's all the prospect analysis I got. For the guy who knows more, let's turn it over to him.
Yeah, so I just finished up a piece just kind of breaking down this trade over at Just Baseball Media for anyone who's watching if you want to check it out. Neither of these guys were surprising that they were on the move on the Orioles side. I mean, O'Hearn, he was just a rental, and the team is 9 games under 500, so it just didn't really seem like they were going to keep him around. Laureano was a bit more of an interesting case just because he did have a cheap club option for next year, but that was also what made him so appealing on the trade market. So by putting the two together, they certainly were able to maximize their output, I guess, that they could have out of these guys, whereas if they had traded them individually, they may not have gotten the same ceiling of maybe the top guys that they got in this deal. But as far as those guys going to the Padres, they're both huge gets for the Padres because I really like this Padres team because of their star power. But due to all the money that they have invested in their star players, and also they're in a bit of a weird transition with their ownership. I believe their main owner had just passed away, and the kids are running the team, and they're kind of, I think, operating a little bit strapped for cash in some ways. So I actually predicted a couple weeks ago in one of my articles that the Padres would be, I guess this wouldn't really be a prediction, but the Padres would be the best fit for Ramon Laureano because they need to acquire an impact outfielder on the cheap who can also benefit them defensively. And that's exactly what he is. He was a really great fit. And then Ryan O'Hearn should fill into sort of that Gavin Sheets role of left-handed hitting DH. He'll probably get some reps at first as well. So 2 huge bats that I think will really help propel the Padres into being a serious playoff contender. And once they get in the playoffs, they're in a lineup that's going to make some noise. I mean, I don't think either of them will even be hitting in the top 4 for the most part because that lineup is already filled with superstars. So initially, before we found out what the return was for the first hour or so, I really liked just the idea for the Padres to go after it. And then on top of that, look, they gave up a lot of prospects, right? But all of these guys were recent draftees. The only one who's made it above A ball is Tyson Neighbors, and he seems to be definitely established as a reliever already from the impression I've gotten. I've read that he has a great curveball. That's his best pitch, and that he could develop into a leverage reliever when he makes it to the major leagues. But even then, he just made it to Double-A. I think best case scenario, he's up mid to late 2026. He's not going to be in consideration for the opening day roster, I would imagine. But the 2 prizes of the trade were Hightower and Bateman. I've seen most outlets favor Bateman as far as ratings goes. Just Baseball, actually, we favored Hightower in our rankings just because just more projectability. We think at a premier position is what I read from our write-up. So they had Hightower saying that he's underperforming a bit this year in A-ball just because he's been banged up, and they think that's maybe affected how he's done. So it hasn't been gaudy numbers for him, but he's been playing shortstop. So he should have the ability to play defense anywhere around the diamond. And then as for Bateman, for Bateman, for Boston Bateman, 6'8", I believe, left-hander who's got really great stuff, still harnessing the command, but I mean, good upside there, it seems like. And then we got three other guys. We got Butterworth, who has actually put up great numbers so far in high A, and I've heard has a good glove from something that I read on Twitter. Figueroa, he was in the complex league, got promoted to A-ball. He's hit home runs as well. And then Tanner Smith, I think he's kind of just getting started on his professional career. So a lot of volume here with the potential for impact. My critique with this one, like with a lot of the trades that we made, is this core needs supplementing for next year. And none of the trades that we did really added anybody who's going to be a factor on this team next year, meaning that we're going to have to go outside of the organization this offseason and add 6 pitchers because the bullpen has been completely gutted. You can't rely on Grayson Rodriguez for more than 100 innings at an absolute max after how this year's gone. You can't just rely on Kyle Bradish giving you 200 innings after Tommy John surgery. So my biggest thing, and I might be jumping the gun with talking about this because there's still so many more trades to go over, Mike Elias did a good job with getting volume and value out of these deals, but I'm a little confused about the vision. He's going to have to really show me that he is going to commit to trading some of these prospects and that he's going to work with Rubenstein to investing and getting some top flight pitching talent that are actually going to carry this team to being a World Series contender soon.
Yeah, I think that's very much my view as well. It feels like less, at last year's trade deadline, it felt like Mike Elias was building for 2025. That's what it felt like at the 24 trade deadline. This year, it doesn't feel like he's building for 26. It almost feels like he's building more for either this winter to get aggressive with some deals, or I also feel like there is an extension of the window that he's trying to maneuver here rather than going in on a couple of these prime years. It's one of those two approaches. I really don't like the second one. I really hope that it is the first one where he said, look, well, as a general manager, what I'm good at is getting good value. And so I'm going to focus on getting value and, like you said, volume. So that way I have a lot more flexibility with the kind of deals I want to try and pull off this winter. That requires some faith in Mike Elias that I'm not sure that he's necessarily earned in the past year or so. It's also possible that he is seeing the Orioles contract years start to tick away for their young core and is thinking he is going to need to continue to replenish the minor league system. We'll have to see. We'll have to give him to the winter to really figure out, maybe even beyond that, to figure out what was the thrust of all these trades. I completely understand using value and volume to put yourself in a position this winter to do more things. He then has to go do those things, which is really like he swung the trade for Burns 2 years, year and a half ago, and really, to a certain extent, has been coasting off of that in terms of being an aggressive GM since. And so, we'll go through the rest of these trades, but I think your read was spot on, is that it is a little confusing given his approach last year to build for 25. This year, he's not building for 26. It's, I assume there is a plan. I may doubt the effectiveness of that plan, but I assume one of those two things that we just talked about is the plan. I want to move on.
And real quick, just to add, I thought this trade was kind of amusing just because AJ Preller strikes me as kind of like the anti-Elias. He is always all in for right now. And Mike Elias, with a good core, says, give me all your ETA 2028 prospects so that I can try and maneuver my way through some trades later on. Whereas Preller's like, no, I am trying to win right now. And he's going to use his great scouting abilities to figure out later.
Right, because they restock that farm system every year. They figure out ways to restock that farm system in San Diego. Want to move on to the second trade here. Cedric Mullins sent to the Mets for Ramon Gomez, Chandler Marsh, and Anthony Nunez. Like we've said about Mullins all year, this is largely about the glove and the speed. His bat has been inconsistent, although I have noted before that he has been one of the team's best when with runners in scoring position this year. But really, we saw this, all this past week. This is about that glove, and this is about that glove keeping balls from hitting the ground or getting over that fence for the Mets in the playoffs.
Yeah, another rental. It was hard to expect too much from this deal. Again, I maybe would have liked trying to get a pitcher who was farther up in the minor leagues, farther up the levels, because the guys that we got are, A ball. I think one of them is in Double A. So still a long way to go in their development towards being an impactful arm. Another thing about this trade is that all three of these guys already project to be bullpen arms. And so when we're looking at probable bullpen arms who are in A ball and Double A, again, it's kind of hard seeing a super high ceiling. One of the guys that we got, which I found this one super amusing. He's not even the highest rated one. I think he's the middle rated guy. Ramon Gomez can pump the fastball up to 104 in a game. And on Fangraphs, he was graded with an 80 grade fastball, meaning this guy's fastball is the best of the best from a scouting perspective. And 20 grade command, meaning he has the worst possible command grade that they could give him. So he throws fuzz and just has no idea where it's going. So honestly, I'm intrigued by this buy. I'm not complaining about getting him because I think these are the kind of arms that we should be buying. We should be going for a ceiling bullpen arm if we're looking at bullpen arms. And I like that get just because maybe he pans out, maybe he doesn't, but at the very least, he's an exciting project. I think the highest rated one was Nunez. He was drafted as a two-way player, pretty much fully transitioned to pitching a couple of years ago. Again, looks like pretty firmly a reliever was the grasp that I got on him, but it seems like he's been performing pretty well. I think he actually ranks in the Mets top 30s pretty much everywhere. So he was the main get, and maybe he'll be a factor like Neighbors in mid to late 2026. I wouldn't bank on the opening day roster again, just because he's in Double A, I believe, but hey, it could be possible. And then I don't know a ton about Chandler Marsh, but I think from looking at his stats earlier, it didn't seem like they were using him over extended stints in his appearances.
Yeah, again, like we're saying, this is volume. We're going to get to know these guys entering the Orioles farm system better over the next few months as they get settled, as the Orioles themselves talk about this trade deadline and what their plan of attack was. But again, this is another deal. They traded 2 players, they got back 6. They traded 1 today, got back 3. That's giving up 3 players. You've gotten 9 prospects back. Now, again, I'm not saying that the name of the game is go out and get as many prospects as you can, but it does seem like there was on deadline day today, there was a strategy of the kind of deals they were looking for to get a large volume of prospects. The other deal that went through I think that first got reported today was Andrew Kittredge getting traded to the Cubs for Wilfred De La Cruz. Kittredge, another guy like Laureano who had a team option, had pitched pretty well this year. Not great, not terrible. It was kind of unclear if the Orioles, having dealt all their other relievers, it seemed like they might want to keep Kittredge and pick up his option for next year. Instead, they send him to Chicago. What's your view on this deal, Daniel?
This one may have been the peak of the mountain as far as my value versus vision critique with Mike Elias, because Wilfred De La Cruz, I believe, signed one of the top 10 most lucrative deals out of the international signing period, either last year or 2 years ago. So he was a pretty well-regarded international prospect who I guess we pursued, and he didn't choose us. But so he ranks pretty well in the Cubs prospect list. I think he was like 17 on MLB Pipeline. So we're definitely we tried to get as good of a player as we could out of this trade. And Kittredge was not a true rental. I think he has a $9 or $10 million club option, so he could be kept around next year. And he seems to be doing fairly well since coming back from that injury earlier in the year. But I think his ETA on Fangraphs was 2031. So De La Cruz, think about how different your life will be when Wilfred De La Cruz debuts for the Orioles. Like, this trade has absolutely nothing to do with this current core, and maybe even the core in AAA. Like, Basayo and Beavers will be well into their major league careers by the time Wilfred De La Cruz is even a thought to this organization. So again, we're trying to bring in value, and I get that. And in a trade like this one for Andrew Kittredge, I think I could forgive it just because I thought that later in the day we were going to go after players that were more within this current group's window, and we never really did. But I was a little baffled looking at this one, honestly. Like, what, when are we going to reap the rewards of this one? It's hard to say, but it seems like we got a player who's well regarded among the league.
Yeah. So the first thing you mentioned, or the second thing you mentioned there about the other players that you thought the Orioles were going to be looking at, as soon as I saw the reports about the Orioles sniffing around like a young starter, like a Mackenzie Gore, that to me screamed that the Orioles front office had texted the reporters to put that information out there because they want to make it seem like they were going after, guys, and they were that some of the players who they were trying to deal, some of the other teams that were interested were like, oh, maybe we'll work a deal around this. I just that to me seemed like very just like a report that I looked at, and I was like, I don't think that's true. I don't think that they were seriously in talks to acquire Mackenzie Gore today or any of the other young pitchers they named. I think it's like you said, they, to an extent, this is kind of a pass on the trade deadline in a way where you're just restocking the farm system, but you're not really making any big swings, so to speak. You're trading expiring contracts, you're restocking the farm system, but you're not going after top prospects that you're really into. You're not going after players who are closer to major leagues. This honestly just felt like, let's get value, and we'll kind of pass on making any other big decisions during this deadline. So I completely get where you're coming from with that. Let's go back in time. July 30th, this was yesterday. The Orioles traded Ramon Urias to the Astros. Ramon deserves a nice farewell as well. A utility guy, was here throughout the rebuild. Was one of the guys that people wanted out of the lineup so that guys like Mayo and Holiday could get consistent at bats. I think those people have been somewhat vindicated by the fact that Mayo has settled in once he got some consistent at bats. But Urias made it tough to take him out of the lineup. That was the thing. I did think that his defense got a little bit overrated for stretches of his time in Baltimore. But I always thought that his bat was just, he's always made it hard to take him out of the lineup because he was such a consistent player. And so he's gone. He goes to Houston for Twine Palmer.
I'm thinking Twine, probably.
Twine is what the word is, so I'm going to say Twine Palmer. And yeah, this one struck me as kind of odd too, just based on the initial kind of stats and profiles that I saw on Palmer. It made more sense a little bit later when the Astros reunited with Carlos Correa. Because at first it seemed like the Astros were really trading for Urias to replace Isaac Paredes, who went down with an injury. He's out for the rest of the year, I believe. But then shortly after the Urias trade, it was announced, or today it came out, that the Astros were reacquiring Carlos Correa, and he is going to be their fourth starting infielder, and Urias is going to remain a utility role. I would have been surprised if another team had come after Urias as an everyday player. Because I think he might have been an everyday player for a non-playoff team, but for a playoff contender, I just don't see him as a guy that you'd be like, oh, I want this guy in the lineup every day.
Absolutely. Urias's value comes from his versatility. You can put him anywhere in the infield, and he could at least do a passable job at short and first for sure. And you put him at second and third, and he's probably an above-average defender there. As far as the bat goes, it plays better at second than it does on the corners because it's not a big bat. It's a probably slightly below average bat, but a playable, rosterable guy for a major league team. He's not a guy who's, fringy as far as staying on the major league roster. No, he is a solid fifth infielder to have on your team just because he gives you some professional at bats and he'll play solid defense, but he probably won't do much more than that. He's good at a lot of things, but not really great at anything. And so since we had about a year and a half left, he was a free agent after 2026. I am totally fine with exploring trade options for him because, we have plenty of guys vying for playing time. Hopefully more of that playing time can be directed towards the impending Mountcastle, Mayo jumble, especially if Basayo joins in that group. That could be happening with first base and DH, and maybe Mayo will get to try third base again, since apparently we've just given up on the rest of this season by not acquiring anyone who's going to help. So frankly, I wouldn't mind seeing Mayo get another shot at third base sometimes when he needs somebody, when Westberg needs somebody to fill in. As far as the return, though, that really baffled me because credit to the Astros, Twine Palmer was a 19th round pick in the 2024 draft, and they turned him in to a major league utility player for a team that's looking to compete just a year later. So I mean, I don't really know why we were in such a rush to trade Arias, especially just to pick up one pitcher in A-ball. I guess he's a guy that really jumped on our models that we think we can make something click with. But I guess I was just a little confused that if this is what we could muster up, why even do it at all? Especially when, I don't know, there's been so many injuries this year and he had been hitting relatively well. I mean, it was his worst career year by hitting, but it was still like a 90 WRC plus. He wasn't bad. So this one was another one that I didn't really get. I kind of just said, okay, Arias isn't that big of a part of the team anyways, and we must like Palmer. But at the same time, why this, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, Palmer's, I think, so it's something you've talked about. I noticed this a little bit with their deadline acquisitions, and something that you've talked about in the past, that a lot of the pitchers that they develop or acquire are just kind of so-so stuff guys. They don't have stuff that's going to win consistently at the major league level without a certain level of control and craftiness. And I think with Bateman, who I forgot to mention this, Bateman, you said he's 6'8". You did not mention he's 240 pounds. He is a tight end. He is a tight end. Send him to the Ravens and let the Ravens train him up as a tight end. Anyway, but I think the one thing I see in this deadline, at least with Palmer and with Bateman, is that they're looking for a little bit of a higher physical ceiling with some of the pitching prospects they go after. It's just like you say, like, yeah, you have a higher ceiling, but these guys are so young, so early in their career, that the floor is in the basement too. And so it is really, again, volume, and you get a lot of them in, and hopefully if 30% of your prospects are going to hit, then the more that you get in, the better. But I agree. I think that this is, one of the more confusing ones because of, again, that really uncertain MLB arrival date for a guy that you just traded for, a guy who is at least, an MLB level player. On some teams, he's an everyday player. So I was a little confused by that deal as well. Once the Correa deal went through, it made a little more sense to see how the Astros and the rest of the league seem to be valuing Urias as a fifth or sixth infielder and not as a true true starter. But agreed that, that return was a little low. It's also like that was Elias's former team. And every time that happens, everyone thinks like, oh, like, how did that deal get through? And, I don't think Elias would do anything that is anti-competitive, but at the same time, one of his less optimal deals of the day was with the team that he used to work for. It's not a great look, regardless of what actually happened. I just think sometimes that's not a great look. Going to go back one more day. The Orioles traded Seranthony Dominguez to the Blue Jays for Warren Watts-Brown. This was the, Seranthony Dominguez walking down the concourse at Camden Yards to switch teams, and in fact came in to pitch against the Orioles that day. He did pitch on the day he was traded, right?
He did, right?
Yeah. He pitched on the day he was traded. The return on that one was Warren Watts-Brown. Daniel, what you got on this guy?
So this was a big trade for the Orioles, and this was my favorite one that they executed for sure, because Dominguez, he was one of our more valuable pieces. He was having a great year, and he has pitched in high leverage situations before in both Philadelphia and here. So he's a guy that a team could easily envision putting in the seventh or eighth inning when they're looking to compete in the playoffs, because he has experience. And then as far as Watts-Brown goes, I believe he's, at least currently, he's ranked as the highest rated prospect that we brought in. I'm sure a lot of the new deals, those haven't totally been tabulated yet. But I like that he's a little bit more developed. He's 23. He's in Double-A. He has a good off-speed pitches, the slider and the curve, and he's getting a lot of strikeouts. This seems like a guy, and he looks like he's going to be a starter. So he's a projected starter. He's 23 in Double A, getting strikeouts. These were the kind of moves I was hoping we would make with all of our trades. We could get more guys within a closer window to the major leagues, and he seems like he's going to make an impact too. So I think this is the one trade that we really nailed. We got another solid pitcher into the upper levels of our minor leagues who could feasibly make an impact in 2026.
Yeah, and Dominguez was a true rental this year, right? He's
Yeah.
in, again, like I talked about earlier, him and Soto, both players that Michael Eyes brought in last year with the hopes that they could be a big part of this year's bullpen. To be quite frank, I didn't think either Dominguez nor Soto were particularly good this year. Dominguez was better. Soto, it was flip a coin every outing, whether he was going to be good or not. And, I think he was traded, and we're going to get to him next. He was traded on July 25th to the Mets, and I believe he already blew a game for them. And so two trades to me last year that just didn't quite work out. Now, it'll be interesting down the line to kind of trace back from the Sir Anthony Dominguez trade to the Orioles, and then what trading him to the Blue Jays, as well as Gregory Soto, to kind of see what did the Orioles start with and what did they end with. It'll be interesting to do that, but like we've been talking about, we don't think that this is all that Michael Elias is going to do with these prospects. This seems like the build up to something more. Like I said, the Orioles traded. Go ahead.
This was, I think, the one trade, like I was saying, where I saw the vision a little bit better. I saw the vision of this guy being a potential impact player soon who could supplement our current core instead of trading for volume, which we chose to do later, with a bunch of basically lottery tickets, right? Even if they're highly rated, it's no guarantee, and especially because none of these guys that we got were top 100 guys. They're not even like, critically acclaimed lottery tickets. They are, good players in single A, a lot of these guys that we got, but not much other than that. Whereas with Watts Brown, the Blue Jays spent more time developing him than these other guys that we got, and he's in close proximity to the big leagues and could make an impact soon. I really like this trade, my favorite trade we made.
All right, so the Orioles trading Sir Anthony Dominguez to Warren Watts Brown was Daniel's favorite trade of the deadline. What did you think of the trade sending Gregory Soto to the Mets for Wellington Aracena and Cameron Foster?
So Soto is still a guy with some intrigue for sure to major league teams, even though he wasn't as good as Dominguez, just because he's a lefty who throws really hard, man. And he has closing experience. He was an all-star in 2021. There's certainly the potential for him to have shutdown innings in the playoffs, no matter the competition. His stuff can be that gross, but sometimes he just has no idea where the ball is going, and he's also a victim of the meltdown inning occasionally too, which is why we weren't able to get any sort of king's ransom for him. This return, I initially thought was disappointing, but after seeing how the rest of the deadline panned out, I think they did okay with this return. Aracena has been very good in low A. He pitched great in his first start in Delmarva, 4 2/3, 1 hit shutout with I think 6 Ks. So he did an awesome job. He's been one of the best performers at the low A level. So it's maybe possible he gets a promotion, bump up for a few starts at the end of the year just because he's been so dominant. I think this is an interesting lottery ticket. He's slotted in at 20th overall. And with a guy like Soto, taking a lottery ticket on one of the best pitchers in single A, I'm okay with, because Soto was just a reliever rental who wasn't even being traded as a closer. So I'm fine with what we got there. And then Foster seems like a bit of a project. He's older. I think he's 26. He's a reliever who's mostly been in Double A. I'm sure he's another one of those guys where, in their analytics, his name popped as something that he has this that we like. And we think if once we get him into our program, we can kind of mold him into a player that we find usable. So with the amount of decimating we did to our bullpen, who knows, could get called up in September if we're at an absolute shortage for bullpen arms. But maybe in 2026, you'll see him make an appearance in the bullpen if everything goes well.
So would you say the Soto and was Soto seem to be your second favorite deal, or is it really Dominguez and then the rest of the others are kind of a jumble?
I think that you could say that. I mean, Again,
The
with the
reason I
go
asked
ahead.
that, sorry, I'll let you explain why. But the reason I asked that is because these were the two acquisitions last year, and it's interesting to see that these are guys that last wanted to go get last year. These are guys that were very popular still on the trade market this year, which I think just tells you how much having a hard throwing reliever with some high leverage experience really can get you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the reason why I have this one as my second favorite is again because Soto wasn't, supposed to make the same kind of impact that a Mullins or an O'Hearn or a Laureano could make. And honestly, the guy that we got back for him might have as good of a ceiling as anyone we got in those other deals. That's another trade where I like that we played for ceiling a little more. Whereas with our better players, it would have been nice to see one or two of the guys be closer to proximity level for us.
Yeah, I've noticed sometimes these, the trades, they kind of get like built around, a top prospect. And in this series of trades, it just doesn't seem like the Orioles identified necessarily that specific top prospect to build their trade around, but instead, I think the Padres trade is a great example of, Bateman and Hightower and Neighbors as kind of the top line guys. And I guess Bateman was the Padres number 3 prospect, I believe.
I think on MLB he was 4.
Yeah, but so kind of a top prospect, but you still got 6 together. So, I think this is something that kind of happens with major league farm systems is that, you have your top 10 prospects. And then once those prospects are gone, the next top 10 that you have, those prospects may not necessarily be better, but they are still ranked, top 10 in your system, if that makes sense. So that's something I just noticed with major league, the farm system and with trades is that, a number prospect of a certain team also depends on that team's overall farm system health. And so, it's which is why it's not the end all be all, and why, Bateman as the centerpiece of that trade, which is such a big trade, still didn't feel like a true centerpiece, if that makes sense.
Especially because it seems like Hightower is fairly similarly rated by a lot of people as well. So again, volume play. We wanted 2 guys who could make the jump into being a big prospect instead of maybe getting, well, the Padres might not be the best example just because, again, they just repeatedly gut their farm system every year. So by the time they had already traded Leo DeVries to the A's, there was their number 1 prospect. Were we going to go after Ethan Salas? I don't know. And then after that, it's anyone's guess who's going to be good. Like they have highly rated players, but none of the other ones were in the top 100. So it's hard to say.
Yeah, and I think that, well, and we'll get to this in a second. Let's talk real quickly about the kind of surprising trade that happened early this month. Brian Baker to the Rays for the number 37 overall pick, that turned into a prep school standout Slater DeBrun, who was committed to Vanderbilt, and the Orioles went, I think, double or close to double
Very
his
close.
slot value to sign him. And so that you can really say they traded Baker for Slater DeBrun. They were very careful about their draft strategy and their bonus pool to make sure that they could land Slater DeBrun. We will also be doing an episode with Daniel breaking down the new prospects from the draft. Now that we've got some more information on them, that'll come soon. But don't want to worry about the draft too much right now. Just want to say, I thought that was an interesting deal to do so close to the draft. I would be curious if they kind of had that general idea of using that pick to target DeBrun over slot or target someone over slot with that pick, or if things just kind of came together on draft day. Just kind of another process question. But thoughts on Baker leaving, thoughts on getting Slater DeBrun in the draft?
I guess I would say based on our other trades that one was pretty fair because Baker has 2.5 years of control, but Slater DeBrun, by a lot of people, seem to think he has top 100 upside as a prospect, like legitimately could be a very highly regarded player. And so made sure to go over slot to get him. I think that ended up being pretty fair because it was a little confusing seeing as though Brian Baker is a good hard throwing reliever this year. And the team still intends to compete next year. But DeBrun is a guy who probably will carry a lot of trade value, and if you're kind of already determined that you're throwing in the towel on this year, bullpen is probably the easiest thing to replace as far as units in Major League Baseball go. So, I mean, if the Orioles were just already deciding we're giving up this season, let's go get overslot talented high school player in the draft. Okay, all right, you can convince me of that. Just spend on the bullpen this offseason and show us you want to win next year.
Yeah, and as I guess that's kind of the whole thing. I don't want to spend too much more time talking about the approach because I think you've done a really good job breaking down what the approach seems to be with all of these deals. But it's kind of just it's kind of like what you said earlier. It's kind of like what I said earlier. They just kind of punted on making any major decisions about the future of their team this right now, which is fine. I don't necessarily fault them for not going really hard after a couple top prospects. Like I said, the thing I said about the media earlier was just I just never believed that they were actually going to go and get like a real player who was going to contribute in 2026. One of my concerns was that they would have kind of a deadline. I don't want to say similar to last year's, but where they tried to use guys like Dominguez and Soto rentals to get a rental for 26. I was kind of afraid that they were going to do that in some way, shape, or form, where they would basically say, "We'll give you a guy for a guy that has more than a year and a half of control, but the half year this year just doesn't really matter that much." And so I was worried that they were going to buy 2026 rentals at this deadline, so they didn't do that. But they also didn't get anyone who could impact in 2026, and so. I think what you said really nails it home. He's got to go and spend money and kind of prove it at this point. I think that, you can say anything you want about lifting off. These trades are not lifting off to a competitive team. And this is why I said earlier, one of my concerns is that Elias is trying to extend out the Orioles window as far as he can, rather than invest now when there is a time to invest in the young cores in the major leagues. I think that this offseason is really going to be the tell of the Elias regime. Is he going to go and use these prospects to get a starting pitcher? Is he going to go spend money on relievers, on pitching? If not, then the plan is to just endlessly try and identify young talent and hope that you can basically line everything up in a single year and win a World Series, because that's what it takes when you go about it this way, when you build from only prospects and you keep replenishing the farm system so that you can replenish the major leagues with those guys. Like you're saying, if this is meant basically, I'm going to get as much ammo for the winter meetings as I can, great. But I do think Elias has to show us that, because his big moves as GM that aren't related to drafting have been trading for Corbin Burns, which was great. The one really, really great move that he's made. But pitching-wise, Morton, Gibson, this year, disappointments. Eflin, who he traded for last year, did not live up to what he was supposed to be this year. Rogers has been brilliant, but unfortunately, he's been brilliant when it hasn't really mattered. And that means that Rogers has to be good into the future in order for his development this year to even matter, and therefore for that trade to have mattered. So I just think this is absolutely a decisive offseason for the Elias regime to figure out, is this guy committed to bringing a World Series to Baltimore by the end of this decade, or is he committed to having a pretty good team for the next 10 years?
Absolutely. And I had a couple of things that I wanted to point out that came to mind as well, just kind of when considering these moves. The first one being, there's less teams that are going to operate as sellers during the winter meetings, because at that point, everyone will believe they're starting fresh. New signings will have trickled in. So I feel like you're going to be working with, and there weren't a lot of true sellers this year, which is something to consider. But how many teams are going to want to part with their good starting pitcher that has 2 or 3 years of control at the winter meetings? Probably not that many. And then another thing to consider is this team is literally probably 6 arms away from being a competitive pitching staff in the rotation and the bullpen. So if trading for these arms is already going to be a struggle, it's not like you're going to be able to just sign 4 or 5 of the best arms in free agency. That's just not usually how free agency works. So where are these impact arms going to come from if we're trading for all these single A players, and not many teams are going to be willing to part with an impactful guy? And so many of our pitchers that we've already tried to develop have kind of been failures. Why should I even believe that all of these single A prospects are going to develop well in our system when none of our pitchers have developed well in our system that we've tried to develop?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only example I would push back with is Bradish, but that's kind of the point, is that there's only been one true example of a guy developing in the system. Obviously, Grayson was a first round pick, second round pick.
Yeah. First round.
And first round pick, big arm, made his way up. And they did fine with him. He struggled with injuries, but these other arms that they're getting, you pointed it out. There are a lot of there are a lot of soft tossers that they have gotten and tried to develop in the past. So I do appreciate the approach that is going more stuff. I think the other point you made is a really good one, and one that is what it was is very understood. That's a terrible way of saying that, but I'm going to stick with it. Is that in the winter meetings, it's before the season. Everyone thinks they can go out and do and accomplish what they want to accomplish that year. And so then you have to target, you have to find teams that are really just in a rut and certainly not going to compete at all. One of the problems with those teams is that one of the reasons they're not competing is because they don't have the players to compete. And there is also the issue of ownership not wanting to lose maybe their one or two good players that keep fans coming to the ballpark. Those are all parts of, I think, the business that go underappreciated is probably the correct word to use, which is, trades are not automatic. Signings are not automatic either. Signings you have at least a little more control over, where there's a number that you can offer. It's going to get the job done. Trades are just way more complicated than that. And so this is a very confident move of Elias to say that he is going to be able to get done what he needs to get done this winter, when a big piece of that would appear to be using some of these prospects to add major league arms. And I just think, like you said, that is so much easier said than done. It is a much more difficult proposition in the winter when everyone thinks they can go and at least compete, make the playoffs and make a run. Teams can talk themselves into that. And then the ones that can't, I don't want any of the Rockies pitchers. So you just end up in a situation where, it is a very competitive market for the one or two talents that might be available on the market. You have shown that you're really not willing to give up anything that you make a deal that you don't see a good value in, which handicaps you further in a scarce and competitive market. And so I'm personally dubious that Elias is going to be able to use these deals to then make the deals he needs to make in the winter. From a trade perspective and from a free agency perspective, it just doesn't seem to be in this team's front office's MO to spend money in free agency. And I don't really know that there's a way around that.
Yeah, absolutely. They must feel really confident in the lockout happening in 2027 to try and get all these single A guys so that we can hit the ground running in 28.
I mean, that would be a galaxy brained kind of way to look at it. I don't know if I give Elias that much credit for keeping his pulse on the rest of the league like that. But I mean, I like you're saying, the vision is not clear. The vision is not clear, or the vision is we want to constantly restock our farm system so we can constantly be in a state of pretty good. And if that's the vision, then why are we even bothering? I do think that there is value in volume, and that's kind of the theme today, is value and volume in these deals. But this trade deadline requires Elias to get a bunch of other things right as well, instead of just getting this deadline right. And it's a risky approach. Like I said, he must be confident in what he wants to do this winter. But unfortunately, I don't share that confidence. And Daniel, I'm not sure if you do either. Anyway, thank you for those of you who tuned in for this live stream. We're definitely going to try and do more of these as the year goes on. Of course, there won't be as many big events to react to. We will be having a pod coming soon from Daniel that is going to with Daniel, obviously, it's going to break down the Orioles draft and kind of give a state of their minor league farm system after the trade deadline, after the draft, just to see where kind of the future young players of the team are going to come from, especially as, we've moved on from a bunch of veterans. There are going to be a bunch of prospect debuts we're going to see the rest of this year, even with guys like Mullins and Laureano coming out of town. We're going to need more outfielders. So very, very active deadline. Daniel, any last thoughts before we sign off here?
It's going to be interesting to watch the team this weekend. There's going to be probably 5 new call-ups. So that bullpen, man, is going to be an absolute turnstile for the rest of the year. It might be a couple tough watches in that series against the Cubs, who are very good.
Yeah, I agree. And not that this year has been a particularly pleasant watch either, but, one thing that was really fun about the rebuild Orioles was that there were a lot of new names. You got to see a lot of players make debuts. And so that is one saving grace of this season. Hopefully we'll get to see some players just watch some guys' dreams come true. And honestly, I think that's an underrated part of watching any sport, is that what you're watching is guys' lifelong dreams come true. And to a certain extent, you just got to be able to appreciate that when your team is in a rut like the Orioles are. So again, thanks so much for everyone who tuned in. And that's going to be the end of our stream today. Thanks so much.